Hey guys, welcome to another Life Math Money video. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the biggest car buying mistake that I've seen people make. And this video, the information in this video is based on about 10 to 12 years of experience dealing with clients in my tax law firm. And I've seen a lot of people fall in two categories, especially my clients who I've had heart to heart conversations with, whose finances I know in and out. People tend to fall in two groups. The first group are the people who think that you should buy the best car you can. Okay, this is the best car group. And the second group are people who think that you should not buy a car at all and instead you should use public transport or Uber or a bike. So I'm going to call them public transport, Uber, or bike group. And these are two very distinct demographics I've noticed. So the first group is typically people who are like families. So there's like a husband, wife, kids, and they tend to think that you should buy the best car you can, the best car that, you can actually afford to pay off. And the second group are typically bachelors. And these guys tend to think, why do I need a car? A car is expensive when I can just get a bike and avoid traffic, or I can just get an Uber or public transport or what have you. So 99% of the times, if you're a family, you have this mentality that you should buy the best car. And if you're a bachelor, you have this mentality. Okay. I've seen this all the time and this is true. Okay. This is not even something that we can argue about. Okay. So in this video, I'm going to tell you why both of these groups are wrong. And I'll give you my advice on something that you should keep in mind when you buy a car. Okay. So I'm going to say both of these groups are wrong. I'll get the easy one out first. Okay. Bikes. Now, bikes are shit. Now, I'm not gonna, get into the whole thing where, bikes are cool and what have you. That's not the point of this article, point of this video now. But bikes are very unsafe. They are just unsafe. And if you have a bad accident, you die. And it doesn't matter whether you are the one who caused the accident or someone else caused that accident to you. So a bike is so unsafe that whether you crash into somebody or somebody else crashes into you, chances are that you are the one who's going to get hurt or die. So you could get like a permanent injury. And I have a client who has this. He has like a limp leg because he fell from a bike and he tore like a whole bunch of muscles and bones in his legs. He tore his ACL, he dislocated his hip, and it was just like he barely survived that accident. Okay. And he was very lucky that he was wearing a helmet. Not everybody wears a helmet. And he had the straps tied on. And he says that if he was not wearing that helmet, he would have died that day. So you can get a permanent injury or you could die. And this quite honestly makes bikes really crappy because, you could very easily die on a bike and you could get a permanent injury. It's just very unsafe compared to a car. So compared to a bike, I would say an Uber or public transport is superior. Now, of course, there is more traffic and those things exist, but safety is important. And, if you're broke, I understand you use a bike, right? Like not everybody can afford a car. That's fine. But you should try to make more money so that you can get a car. So bike is like the worst of the worst. Okay. This is like, I would not recommend you drive a bike. Okay. Then what about public transport and Uber? Okay, this is more like slavery in a way. This is like slavery. Because you are kind of beholden to public transport and all these companies to provide you a means of transportation, right? So you are dependent. And I'll give you examples of situations in my life, right, where this has turned out like if someone doesn't have a car, it can cause real problems. For example, a few weeks ago, my wife went in labor and she went in labor at about 4 a.m. in the night. Okay. What do I do at 4 a.m. in the night if I don't have a car? Well, I could try to book an Uber, but that might take like an hour to arrive, 30 minutes to arrive. It might not arrive. The guy might cancel. And it essentially means that when you have some kind of emergency, like someone had a heart attack, someone got injured, or you have a wife in labor, a sick kid or something, right? You are essentially completely dependent on somebody else to take you to the destination you need to go to who may arrive on time, who may not arrive on time, who might cooperate with you, who might not cooperate with you. It is kind of like slavery. I mean, it really is. And all I can say is that if you can't afford anything, you can't afford the cheapest car, well, you just don't have a choice. But if you can afford a car, you should have a car. So if you can afford a car, you should have a car. Do not depend on public transport for your transportation. It's just not a good idea. Use some common sense, right? If you have an emergency and Uber is not available, it's night, so public transport is not available, what are you gonna do? Having your own car is just superior. You can use it at your convenience, and you don't have to, rely on anybody else. Okay, so I'm gonna make a broad statement, and I'm gonna say, a man must own his own means of transportation. A man must own his own means of transportation. Okay, a man must own his own means of transportation. If you do not own your own means of transportation, at some level, you're like someone else's bitch. Like, it's really the simplest way I can put it, okay? Okay. So, what is the biggest mistake people who actually buy a car make? The biggest mistake people who are buying a car make is that they buy a car that they can barely afford. Okay? Biggest mistake. Buying a car that you can barely afford. Right? So what guys do is that they have a budget, okay? Let's say that at most, they can spend some money, like let's say 30 lakhs on a car at most, okay? And that is, stretching out the budget and trying to like find the true limit, right? At most they can spend 30 lakhs on a car, then they will buy a car that's closest to 30 lakh as possible. So they buy a car they can barely afford. It's like at the very edge of their affordability. Sometimes they take car loans that take like many years to pay off, or they just like, it sometimes I've seen guys who will buy a car that costs them like 1 to 2 years of income. So if you're making like 50K a year, you might buy a car that costs 50K a year, or like 100K a year. Sorry, you might buy a car that costs 100K if you make 50K a year. So these are these cars that you can barely afford. This is like the most common thing I've seen when people buy cars, okay? I've seen this with lots of clients, and I'll tell you the true mistake with this. The true mistake with this is that you end up becoming a slave to your car. So expensive car makes you a slave. I'll tell you why. Okay, instead of using the car for having fun and enjoying yourself, and the reason you buy a car, going from place to place, enjoying yourself, traveling, etc., you end up becoming a slave to the car, where you have to take care of the car all the time, right? So to protect the car from scratches, dents, damages. So you become the car's caretaker. Instead of you enjoying the car becomes like this thing that you always have to take care of. You have to make sure it doesn't get scratched, dent, damaged. And at the same time, you are afraid. So you are afraid of the day the car breaks down. Because fixing this car is going to be expensive for you, right? Like if the engine failed and the car is out of warranty, well, then suddenly the cost that you have to pay is quite heavy, right? It might cost you a month of income, maybe even more. So you are essentially fearful. And at the same time, in exchange for being a caretaker, like, and a fearful caretaker, you have to pay a lot of money to the bank, right? So you become the bank's bitch, right? You become the bank's bitch because you now dedicate years of your life to paying this bank, EMI, interest, or whatever. Sometimes I've even seen bank staff coming to your house every few months to verify that you actually own the car and that you haven't, given it to someone else or you haven't sold it. So, I mean, I've never experienced this. I've heard it from clients. There's a client I had who bought a fridge from some, NBFC loan, and every few months someone from the NBFC will come to his house to verify whether the fridge is still there or not. So it's essentially slavery, right? So car loan, this is my opinion, okay? Car loan equals to slavery. This is just like, you can't convince me otherwise. I've seen this. It just like, someone comes to your house to verify whether you own something or not, or if you, and they can like enter your house and they can repossess your car. Like, come on, man. Like, that's just slavery. Not to mention that you can't have as much fun in a car that you barely afford, right? You would be afraid to eat in a car. You can't eat in that car. You'll be like, this is gonna ruin the leather in the car. It's gonna damage the car, right? Not to mention all of this stuff like scratches, dents, etc. So basically, the fun factor is not there, right? You have very little fun with this car, simply because you can't afford it, right? Can't afford it. It's barely at the edge of your affordability. So you are the one who's basically taking care of this car, and it just isn't the same as you truly enjoying the car, okay? So the car is like a white elephant. So what is better than this? What is better? Let me add a new page. New page at the end. Okay. Let me add another page at the end. Okay. So what is the thing that you should do? So you should buy a car. This is my advice, right? This is the conclusion of the video. Buy a car that you can easily afford. Buy a car that you can easily afford. It should be a car where if it gets scratched or dented or get some damage in other ways, it should cause you very little emotional pain. Basically, by your standards of income, whatever money you're making, the cost of repairing this should be very cheap. Now, what happens if the cost of repairing a car is very cheap? You feel you don't care, right? If you damage a very cheap car, you don't give a shit. Like, it's a scratch. Who gives a shit? I can just get it fixed whenever I want, right? You won't have to be careful with the car. You don't have to be careful with a car like this because it's cheap, because you can easily afford it, right? And I'll give you some personal examples, okay? I own about 3-4 cars, and technically, while they're owned by my company, I don't own them, but that's for tax reasons. But let's just say, for simplicity, I own them. What happens to me, okay? What do I end up doing most of the time? Most of the time, when I want to go out on an adventure, I take my cheap car. Whenever I want to go out on an adventure, how do I write on this? One sec. Oh, it stopped working. Okay, I can't figure out how to write on this, but whenever I do go out, I typically end up taking my cheap car with me For the simple reason is that I don't give a shit if it gets scratched. I don't care if the car, this car, if it gets scratched here, or if it hits these scrubs and bushes, it doesn't bother me at all. It's just not something that I care about, right? It's a cheap car. That's the whole point. And for my expensive cars, you know what happens to my expensive cars? They stay in parking, and the only times they end up getting used are when I have to go to the airport, when I have to pick someone from the airport, or if I'm going out to, lunch or something, I'm going to a restaurant and I know there's going to be safe parking there and I don't have to park on the street. So I barely end up using the expensive cars, but this cheap car, right? I end up taking it anywhere, anytime I want to go out to travel or have some fun, or if I want to go hiking and I know I'm not going to get parking, the car might get damaged, there's going to be off-roading, or, I have to go through a jungle. I take this cheap car out because then I don't have to worry about it getting scratched or, like some damage accumulating, it gets dented, someone crashes slightly into it. Don't care, right? Like it's a cheap car, right? It's cheap for a reason. And it doesn't really impact me emotionally. On the other hand, a car that's really expensive, like I tend to be more careful. I don't want it getting scratched. I don't want it getting dented. And, I want to make sure that it's parked in a safe place. So the point is that I end up having maybe 100 times more fun with this cheap car than I have with any of my expensive cars. In fact, I barely use the expensive cars, and they're mostly there for, local transportation. So even if they're more capable, they're just not being used as much. And I'm going to tell you that if you buy a car you can barely afford to buy a very expensive car, you're going to think the same way as me. You will be very careful with how you use your car. You will not want to take your car out to jungles and off-roading and, hiking and, any place where the car might get damaged because repairs are just so expensive, right? So get a cheap car that you can easily afford, and I'm gonna guarantee you that you will have much more fun in that car than in any other car that you can barely afford. Okay. So this car, the advantage is that it has 4x4 in it. So I don't have to worry too much. But even if you get a cheap car that doesn't have 4x4, it's still fine. I mean, there are very few places where you really need 4x4. And just get a cheap car that you can easily afford. And I'm telling you, it's gonna be the best car buying decision you will ever make. It might not have the most social impact, where if you're trying to show off to your friends, look, I can afford an expensive car. That factor is missing, but who cares about that really? Like, that doesn't really matter. What actually matters is that you get the most out of the money that you've spent, and you will get the most out of a cheap car, right? I'm telling you this. I know I've had clients where I've given them the same lecture and, they've paid me for my time, but they went ahead and bought a very expensive car and they later say, Harsh, you're right. And I barely use this car, blah, blah, blah. And they end up selling that car like a year and a half later to buy a cheap car. So do it right from the get-go. You will get much more fun out of a cheap car than an expensive car. And the same logic actually applies to all consumer purchases, right? Not just cars, but also, watches. If you buy a watch you can barely afford, some luxury brand or what have you, Rolex. I mean, I don't know, I use a smartwatch, but, you buy like an expensive watch. Are you actually going to wear it, right? Because what I've seen is that people who buy very expensive watches, they don't use it as much. Simply because they're afraid of banging it, right? They think they might bang it or scratch it or just damage it in any other way. So it ends up becoming like this thing where when they're wearing that watch, instead of enjoying the watch, they end up becoming the slave. They become the caretaker for that watch. And, if the watch gets hit on the table, they feel pain. They check the watch, I hope I've not damaged the watch. And they are afraid that the watch might get stolen. So they're constantly checking their watch. And at that point, like you spend so much money on this watch, but now you can't enjoy the watch at all simply because it's so expensive. So it's not enjoyable for you, not enjoyable, right? So for all consumer purchases, this logic applies. Buy things that you can easily afford. And of course, the definition of easily afford changes according to your income, right? Someone making $1 million a year For him, like 300K is like easily affordable. But for someone making, say, 80K a year, easily affordable could be like 20, 25K. So it really depends on your income level, but buy stuff, buy consumer goods that you can easily afford. And you'll be able to get the most out of them. You will get the most fun out of them. You won't have to worry about, not damaging it, banging it, scratching it, etc. Watch, shoes, follow the same example. At least I've noticed this with my foreign clients. They really care about expensive shoes. I mean, in India, like, people don't give a shit. Then, there's electronics. There's so many consumer items, clothes, right? Buy things that you can easily afford so you can actually use them. Remember the whole goal of making money, okay? The goal of making money is not to buy expensive shit, okay? The goal of making is to be free, to be able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. And being a caretaker for expensive shit and paying loans to banks is the opposite of being free, right? So you don't want to be a caretaker for possessions. It is the opposite of freedom. Don't do this, okay? So that's all for this video. I do want to tell you guys about a story now that I mentioned this car. Right, so when I was out on a trek, right, we were taking some photographs. It was me and my wife, and our car started making this sound. Okay, it was like, so we went out and we checked, and we noticed that one of our tires had burst. And this is not just like a tire that's punctured. This tire is cracked, so it had to be replaced. And can you guess how much this tire cost us? Well, it cost us $200. Okay, and for me, this is fairly easy to afford. But if we had a more expensive car, how much would this tire have cost us? It would have cost us about $1,000. That's really expensive, right? For a tire, like, you bust a tire, it costs you $1,000. Well, the tire ends up costing you more than your vacation, right? So this is not a good idea. Likewise, the place we were stuck at was this jungle. There was nothing around for 30, 40 kilometers, except for these monkeys who were curiously watching us. And, we were a little concerned that the monkeys would attack us, but they didn't, thankfully. But if they did, right, we could have just sat in the car. At most, the monkeys could have damaged the car. But, it's a cheap car, right? So it doesn't actually matter. Any repairs that I made to this tire, I had to buy a new tire. It was cheap. It was not expensive. I didn't have to, like, think about, hey, this is going to cost so much money. It's going to disturb my budget. It didn't process. It didn't compute that way because it was cheap. So you have to make sure that anything you buy should be easy to repair, cheap to repair, shouldn't become like a thing that you're a caretaker for. And that's all for this video, right? That's everything here. So if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, like, and whatever else people do on YouTube. And let me know what you thought in the comments below. And I'm going to see you guys next week with another video. And hopefully you guys are enjoying these, and let me know what you think.